I was standing under the harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights of a dingy thrift store, holding a tiny, faded piece of fabric, and I swear to you, I felt like the floor had completely dropped out from beneath me. My stomach violently churned. My vision actually blurred for a second. Have you ever looked at an object so deeply personal, something so tied to your own flesh and blood, and found it discarded in a place it had absolutely no right to be? I couldn't breathe. I just stood there, staring at a faded neon price tag slapped carelessly over a memory I thought was completely safe. How does the history of your own child end up hanging on a rusted metal rack, abandoned amongst strangers' cast-offs? And more importantly, what do you do when you realize the person who threw your memories away like literal garbage was the very family member you trusted to protect them? Let me back up, because to understand why I was standing in the middle of a second-hand store fighting off a literal panic attack, you need to understand how much love went into the things I gave away. I am 23 years old, and my entire world revolves around my 16-month-old daughter. When I found out I was pregnant, I was young, terrified, but overwhelmingly excited. Becoming a mother changes your brain chemistry. Suddenly, every little thing carries so much weight. You start looking at the world differently. You start looking at objects differently. If you are a parent, you know exactly what I am talking about. Baby clothes aren't just pieces of fabric. They are tiny cotton time capsules. Every time my daughter outgrew a onesie, it broke my heart just a little bit. I would hold up a footy pajama that used to swallow her whole, realizing that now she couldn't even stretch her little legs out in it. I remember the exact outfit she wore when we brought her home from the hospital. I remember the sleeper she had on when she first slept through the night. The little yellow shirt she wore when she had her first blowout that I spent an hour scrubbing in the sink. And the tiny fleece jacket she wore the first time she saw snow. You don't just throw those things away. You wash them in that sweet-smelling baby detergent. You fold them perfectly, and you store them. You hold on to them, because letting go of the clothes feels a little bit like letting go of the baby that wore them. Among all these clothes, there was something incredibly special, a holy grail of my family's history. It was a tiny, delicate little baby shirt that had actually belonged to me when I was an infant. My mother had saved it for over 2 decades. She kept it in a cedar chest, perfectly preserved, and gifted it to me at my baby shower. When I opened that box and saw the little shirt I used to wear, I cried. Seeing my own daughter wear it a few months later was one of the most surreal, beautiful moments of my life. It was a physical bridge between my past and my daughter's present. So, when my sister-in-law announced she was pregnant, I was overjoyed. She is 28, a bit older, a bit more established, but we had always maintained a decent relationship. I wouldn't say we were absolute best friends who told each other our deepest, darkest secrets, but we were family. We spent holidays together, we texted about family gossip, and when she found out she was having a little girl, I felt this incredible surge of sisterly bonding. My niece was born when my daughter was about 10 months old. I couldn't wait to shower this new baby with love, and as any mother knows, babies grow at lightning speed. By the time my niece was arriving, I had bins and bins of pristine, high-quality, deeply cherished baby clothes sitting in my daughter's closet. Some of them had barely been worn. Some of them were deeply sentimental. I decided I wanted to pass these clothes on to my sister-in-law. Hand-me-downs are practically a sacred tradition in families. It felt like a rite of passage. I remember spending an entire Saturday afternoon going through the plastic bins in my living room. I put on some soft music, poured myself a cup of coffee, and sat on the floor, touching every single little garment. I carefully inspected each piece. I made sure there were no stains. I made sure every snap worked perfectly. I washed everything all over again just so it would have that fresh, clean baby smell when she opened the boxes. I folded them with so much care, neatly stacking the newborn sizes, the 0 to 3 months, the 3 to 6 months. I felt so proud packing those boxes. I was giving my niece the best of what we had. I wasn't just giving my sister-in-law free clothes to save her some money. I was sharing my daughter's journey with her. I was keeping these memories in the family. Now here is the unwritten rule of hand-me-downs, at least in every circle I have ever been a part of. When someone gifts you a massive haul of their child's outgrown clothes, you accept them with grace, you use what you can, and when your child outgrows them, you ask a very simple question. You say, "Hey, my baby outgrew these. Would you like them back for memories? Or for a future child? Or would you like me to pass them on to someone else?" It's just common courtesy. It is a baseline level of respect for the person who clothed your child for the first 6 months of their life. You don't just assume ownership of family memories and do whatever you want with them. But when I handed those heavy boxes over to my sister-in-law, I didn't explicitly state the rules. I didn't sit her down and give her a contract to sign. I didn't say, "Hey, I would absolutely love these back when you are done." I didn't think I needed to. I thought she understood the value of what I was handing her. I assumed, foolishly, that she had the same emotional intelligence and respect for family history that I did. As the months went by, I loved seeing my little niece in those familiar outfits. Every time my sister-in-law posted a picture on Instagram or brought the baby over for a family dinner, I would spot a familiar floral onesie or a pair of tiny pink sweatpants, and my heart would swell. I'd point and say to my husband, "Look, she's wearing the outfit our baby wore on her first Thanksgiving." It felt right. It felt like exactly what family is supposed to do. My niece is now 6 months old. Naturally, she has outgrown the newborn and 0 to 3 month clothes. I knew this, but I hadn't really thought much about where the clothes went once she grew out of them. I figured they were sitting in a bin in my sister-in-law's house, waiting for the day she either had another baby or asked me if I wanted them back. I never, in a million years, expected to find the answer to that question on a random Tuesday afternoon. I rarely have time to myself anymore. But on this particular day, my husband had taken our daughter to the park, and I had exactly 2 hours of glorious, uninterrupted free time. I decided to run some errands and just enjoy the silence. I live in a fairly suburban area, and we have 2 local thrift stores. One of them is a massive, highly curated vintage shop that I visit frequently. My sister-in-law knows I go there all the time, but the other thrift store is a little further out of the way. It's one of those chaotic, messy, disorganized charity shops. The kind of place that smells faintly of mothballs and old dust, where the clothing racks are packed so tightly you have to use both hands to shove the hangers apart just to see what's there. I almost never go to this second location, and my sister-in-law knows that too. But for some reason, maybe fate, maybe sheer intuition, I pulled my car into the cracked asphalt parking lot of that messy, distant thrift store. I just wanted to wander. I grabbed a wobbly shopping cart and pushed it through the squeaky automatic doors, completely unaware that the next 20 minutes were going to shatter my trust in my family. I wandered aimlessly through the aisles, the squeaky wheel of my shopping cart echoing over the low, tinny pop music playing from the ceiling speakers. I browsed through the mismatched glassware, ran my hand along some old wooden picture frames, and eventually, out of pure habit, I drifted toward the back corner of the store where the baby section was located. Even though my daughter had a full closet at home, I can never resist looking at baby clothes. There is always that thrill of finding a nearly new name-brand item for $2. The baby section in this particular store was a mess. It was just a long, chaotic wall of tightly packed plastic hangers, sorted vaguely by colour but definitely not by size. I started casually flipping through the racks. A faded blue onesie, a pair of denim overalls, a yellow knitted sweater. Then, my hand brushed against a very specific texture, a soft, ribbed, mauve-coloured fabric. I paused. My brain registered a flash of deep familiarity before I even fully processed what I was looking at. I pulled the hanger out from the tightly compressed row of clothes and held it up to the harsh fluorescent lights. It was a tiny mauve long-sleeve bodysuit. Not just any bodysuit. It was a boutique brand, one that I had splurged on for my daughter's 6-month milestone photos. I stared at it. It had a very distinct, tiny pull in the threading near the left shoulder. A pull that had happened when my daughter's little fingernail caught on it while I was changing her. My heart did a strange, slow thump in my chest. What a coincidence, I thought. Someone else in town bought the exact same boutique outfit and donated it here. I pushed the hanger back and continued sliding down the rack. 2 items later, I stopped again. A pair of white, fleece-lined baby sweatpants with a tiny embroidered bear on the left pocket. I recognized the bear immediately. I had bought those pants on a family vacation to a mountain cabin. They were a souvenir. They weren't from a massive chain store. They were from a tiny, independent gift shop 3 states away. The air in the thrift store suddenly felt incredibly thick. The low hum of the refrigeration unit near the back wall seemed to grow louder, buzzing in my ears. I pulled the sweatpants off the rack. My hands were actually starting to shake. I frantically started shoving the hangers left and right, moving faster now, my eyes scanning the chaotic sea of cotton and fleece. There. A green sleeper with little white daisies. Mine. There. A tiny pink cardigan with pearl buttons. Mine. There. A set of 3 pattern bibs that I had custom ordered off Etsy. Mine. I felt a sudden wave of intense, visceral nausea wash over me. The kind of nausea that hits you when you narrowly avoid a car accident. A cold, sickening adrenaline spike that drops straight to the pit of your stomach. My mouth went completely dry. This wasn't a coincidence. This was my daughter's wardrobe. These were the clothes I had painstakingly washed, folded, packed into pristine plastic bins, and handed over to my sister-in-law with nothing but love and excitement. She hadn't just gotten rid of them. She hadn't passed them on to another family member. She hadn't given them to a friend in need. She had gathered up the sacred memories of my baby's first months of life, tossed them into black garbage bags, and unceremoniously dumped them at a dirty thrift store she specifically knew I never went to. I felt my face grow hot. The betrayal was like a physical blow to the chest. How could she? How could she look me in the eye at Sunday dinners, knowing she had chucked my deeply personal gifts into a donation bin like they were useless trash? Did she even look at them before she threw them away? Did she even care? I was breathing shallowly, my eyes darting frantically across the racks, desperately pulling out every single item I recognized and throwing it into my cart. I felt like a crazed woman. I didn't care who was watching. I was rescuing them. I felt a desperate, primal need to get my daughter's history out of this dirty, chaotic place. I grabbed a stack of onesies. I grabbed the floral sleepers. I grabbed the little denim jacket. I was almost crying, the tears hot and heavy behind my eyes, blurring my vision. And then the world completely stopped. My hand touched a piece of fabric that made my entire body go cold. It wasn't a modern boutique brand. It wasn't a Target onesie. It was a slightly faded, incredibly soft, vintage white cotton shirt with delicate pale pink smocking across the chest. It was my shirt. The baby shirt my mother had saved in a cedar chest for 23 years. The shirt I had cried over at my baby shower. The shirt that linked my infancy to my daughter's infancy. The literal family heirloom hanging on a rusty metal hook, with a neon yellow sticker slapped directly onto the delicate smocking that read $1.99. A small, strangled gasp escaped my throat. I couldn't help it. I snatched the shirt off the rack, clutching it to my chest, and I just stood there in the middle of aisle 4, completely paralyzed by devastation. She threw it away. She threw my baby shirt away. She knew what this was. I had explicitly told her the history of this shirt when I gave her the boxes. I had held it up in her living room, smiling, and said, "This was mine when I was a baby. My mum saved it for 20 years. Make sure you get a picture of my niece in it." She knew, and she still threw it into a donation pile. For $1.99, A total stranger could have bought my family history to use as a literal rag to clean their floor. For $1.99, my mother's love, my childhood, and my daughter's memory were going to be sold to whoever happened to walk down this aisle. I felt an overwhelming surge of anger, hot and sharp, entirely replacing the nausea. My sister-in-law wasn't just careless. This was callous. This was profoundly, deeply disrespectful. She had taken my kindness, my generosity, and my vulnerability, and she had literally treated it like garbage. I looked down into my wobbly shopping cart. It was piled high with the clothes I had so carefully folded just months prior. Now they were wrinkled, smelling faintly of the thrift store's dusty air, tagged with neon stickers. I didn't want all of them. I didn't have the space to store everything again, and honestly, looking at some of the basic, everyday onesies just made me feel sick. But I couldn't leave the sentimental items. I refused to let my family's history rot in this store. I meticulously sorted through the pile in my cart right there in the aisle. I picked out the custom items, the souvenir clothes, the outfits my daughter had worn for her milestones, and, of course, I held onto my vintage baby shirt like my life depended on it. I left the basic, everyday clothes on the rack. Someone else could use them. But the memories? I was taking them back. I walked up to the cash register. My hands were still trembling as I placed the tiny garments onto the scratched counter. The cashier, an older woman chewing gum, barely looked up as she scanned the neon tags. "That'll be $18.45, she mumbled, popping her gum. I pulled out my credit card. I was literally buying my own property back. I was paying money to retrieve the gifts I had freely given to my family. The sheer absurdity of the situation made me want to scream or laugh hysterically. I honestly couldn't tell which. I took the plastic bag from the cashier, walked out the sliding glass doors, and practically sprinted to my car. The moment I shut the car door and the silence of the vehicle surrounded me, the dam broke. I dropped my head against the steering wheel and I sobbed. I didn't just cry, I ugly cried. My chest heaved and the tears soaked into the fabric of my own shirt. I felt so stupid. I felt so naive. Why did I trust her? Why did I assume she would value my daughter's things just because I did? Why didn't I just say, "Please give these back when you're done"? But even as I asked myself those questions, the anger flared up again. I shouldn't have had to ask. You don't throw away heirloom baby clothes. You just don't. It is an unspoken law of human decency. I sat in that hot car for 20 minutes, staring at the plastic thrift store bag sitting in my passenger seat. The vintage smocked shirt was visible through the thin white plastic. My stomach was in tight, painful knots. I was devastated. I felt entirely, completely alienated from my sister-in-law. Every smile, every text message, every "thank you" she had ever given me felt like a massive, mocking lie. I wiped my eyes, put the car in drive, and drove home in complete silence. My mind was racing a mile a minute. What do I do now? Do I confront her? Do I send her a picture of the thrift store receipt and tell her I know what she did? Do I just swallow the pain and pretend I never went to that store? And more importantly, I thought about the heavy, taped-up cardboard box currently sitting in the corner of my daughter's bedroom. The drive home felt like an absolute eternity. My mind was a chaotic jumble of fury, hurt, and desperate rationalization. I kept gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white, trying to find some logical explanation for what I had just experienced. Maybe she accidentally donated the wrong bag. Maybe her husband did it without asking her. Maybe she hired an overly zealous organizer who purged her baby's closet while she was at work. But deep down, in the pit of my stomach, I knew those were just desperate lies I was telling myself to soften the blow. You don't accidentally donate a heavily embroidered vintage baby shirt that your sister-in-law specifically told you was a 23-year-old family heirloom. You don't accidentally bag up an entire wardrobe of boutique, pristine clothes and drop them off at the dingiest thrift store in town, the exact store you know your sister-in-law never visits. It was deliberate. It was convenient for her, and she didn't care enough to ask me if I wanted them back. I pulled into my driveway, killed the engine, and just sat there for a minute, staring at my house. My safe haven. Inside, my husband was probably playing on the floor with our daughter, completely unaware that a piece of our family history was sitting in a plastic grocery bag in the passenger seat, smelling of stale dust and old perfume. I grabbed the bag, my fingers tightly gripping the thin plastic handles, and walked inside. The house smelled like roasted chicken and the faint scent of my daughter's lavender baby lotion. My husband was sitting on the living room rug, stacking soft blocks while our 16-month-old aggressively knocked them down with a squeal of delight. It was such a domestic, peaceful scene, a stark contrast to the emotional hurricane ripping through me. "Hey," my husband said, looking up with a smile that immediately faded when he saw my face. "Whoa, what's wrong? You look like you just saw a ghost." I didn't say a word. I just walked over to the coffee table, dumped the contents of the thrift store bag onto the glass surface, and stared at the crumpled, neon-tagged clothes. He slowly stood up, looking utterly confused. "Did you go thrifting? What is this?" He reached out and picked up the white fleece sweatpants with the embroidered bear. I watched his face closely. I watched as his brow furrowed, his eyes narrowing as he recognized the item. Then, he picked up the mauve boutique onesie. Finally, his eyes landed on the vintage white smocked shirt. He looked up at me, his mouth slightly open. "Wait, are these—" "Yes," I choked out, my voice cracking. "I found them at the sketchy thrift store across town. The one she knows I don't go to." My husband's face went completely blank for a second, processing the information. Then, the realization hit him, and his expression shifted from confusion to cold, hard anger. "Are you kidding me? She donated them. She donated your baby shirt." $1.99, I said, pointing a shaking finger at the bright yellow sticker still clinging to the delicate fabric. "She threw away my childhood, our daughter's memories, everything I gave her, for some stranger to buy for less than $2. My husband ran a hand through his hair, pacing the length of the living room. "I can't believe this. I honestly cannot believe this. Why didn't she just ask us if we wanted them back? Or, hell, at least ask if she could give them to another family?" "Because she doesn't care," I yelled, suddenly unable to contain the fury boiling over. "She doesn't care about the history. She doesn't care about the sentimental value. She just wanted them out of her house. She took my generosity and threw it in the literal trash." I collapsed onto the couch, burying my face in my hands. I felt entirely drained. The adrenaline from the thrift store was wearing off, leaving behind a heavy, hollow sadness. I looked over at my daughter, who was happily chewing on a rubber block, completely oblivious to the fact that her history had just been rescued from the clearance rack. "What are we going to do?" my husband asked quietly, sitting down next to me and putting an arm around my shoulders. I took a deep breath, staring at the pile of clothes on the table. "I don't know. But I know what I'm not going to do." I stood up, walked down the hallway and opened the door to my daughter's nursery. Tucked securely in the corner of the room, near the rocking chair, was a large, heavy, neatly taped cardboard box. Written on the side in thick black Sharpie were the words, "For niece, 6 to 9 months." I had packed that box just last week. I had spent hours doing the exact same routine, washing, folding, smoothing out the tiny wrinkles, admiring the little outfits my daughter had outgrown over the past few months. I had been so excited to give it to my sister-in-law the next time we saw her. I had even packed a few special holiday dresses in there, thinking about how cute my niece would look in them for Christmas. I stared at the black Sharpie letters. The thought of handing that box over to her now made my stomach physically violently churn. The image of her smiling, saying, "Thank you so much," while secretly planning to dump the entire box into a donation bin the second her baby outgrew them, flashed vividly in my mind. I walked over to the box, grabbed the thick packing tape on the top flap, and ripped it open with a loud, satisfying rip. I started pulling the clothes out, throwing them haphazardly onto the nursery floor. The pristine floral dresses, the cozy winter sweaters, the tiny little matching sets. I was undoing hours of careful work, but I didn't care. I felt a fierce, protective instinct flaring up inside me. I was guarding these memories. She is not getting a single thread of this, I muttered to myself, aggressively yanking a pink tulle skirt out of the box. Not one single item. My husband appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame. He watched me dismantle the donation box for a moment before speaking. "So, we're cutting off the hand-me-downs?" he asked, his tone fully supportive. "Absolutely," I said, tossing a tiny pair of jeans onto the growing pile on the carpet. "If she doesn't respect the clothes, she doesn't get the privilege of having them. I'm not running a free wardrobe supply for someone who treats my child's things like disposable garbage." I sat back on my heels, surrounded by the colourful sea of my daughter's outgrown clothes. I felt a strange sense of relief mixed with the lingering anger. I had made my decision. The pipeline of free, high-quality, sentimental clothes to my sister-in-law was permanently shut down. But as the evening wore on, the initial rush of decisive action began to fade, replaced by a gnawing, uncomfortable anxiety. We had a family dinner scheduled for that coming Sunday. At my in-laws' house. My sister-in-law, her husband, and my 6-month-old niece were going to be there. How on earth was I supposed to sit across a dining room table from this woman, pass the mashed potatoes, and smile, knowing what she did? How was I supposed to look at her holding her baby, knowing she had callously discarded my baby's history in a dirty thrift store? Do I say something? Do I pull her aside in the kitchen and casually mention, "Hey, funny story, I went to that sketchy thrift store across town today and ended up buying my own family heirloom back for $1.99. Crazy, right?" Do I blow up the family dynamic? Do I let my husband confront his sister? Or do I just swallow the pain, keep my mouth shut, and quietly never give her another item of clothing for the rest of her child's life? I picked up my phone, opening my messages. I had a text from my sister-in-law from 2 days ago. "Hey, so excited to see you guys on Sunday. By the way, Metha is totally outgrowing her 3 to 6 month stuff. Do you happen to have any of Metha's old 6 to 9 month clothes lying around? Would love to grab them if you're looking to clear space. Love ya." I stared at the glowing screen, the sheer audacity of the text message making my blood boil all over again. She was asking for more. She had literally dumped my previous gifts into a thrift store bin, and now she had the absolute nerve to ask for the next batch. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard. I could end this right now. I could send a text that would ignite a massive family war. Or I could send a text that would passive-aggressively shut her down. My fingers literally shook over the screen of my phone. The urge to text back something venomous, something that would absolutely nuke the relationship from orbit, was overwhelming. I wanted to type, "Oh, you mean the clothes you throw away at the grimy thrift store across town? No thanks, I'll just donate them myself and save you the trip." I stared at the blinking cursor. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It would feel so good. It would feel like justice. For a split second, I imagined the look on her face when she read it. The sudden realization that she was caught, the scramble to come up with some pathetic excuse. But then, I heard my daughter giggle from the living room. It was a pure, sweet sound that instantly grounded me. I took a deep, shaky breath and let my thumbs fall away from the screen. If I sent that text, I wasn't just dealing with my sister-in-law. I was dealing with my mother-in-law, my father-in-law, my husband, and the entire interconnected web of family dynamics that would inevitably blow up over a pile of used baby clothes. I knew exactly how it would play out. She would cry. She would play the victim. She would say I was being dramatic, that she's a busy new mum, that she didn't realize the shirt was that important, that she just got overwhelmed with clutter, and somehow, in the twisted logic of family drama, I would become the crazy, oversensitive sister-in-law who started a screaming match over a $1.99 price tag. I hit the lock button on my phone and tossed it onto the nursery glider. No, I thought, I'm not giving her the satisfaction of a fight. I'm going to be smarter than this. I spent the next hour carefully repacking the box of 6 to 9 month clothes. But this time, I wasn't packing them for my niece. I was packing them for a local women's shelter I had researched months ago. If I was going to give away my daughter's beautiful, pristine clothing, I was going to make damn sure it went to someone who genuinely needed it. Someone who would look at a warm fleece jacket and feel relief, not treat it like disposable trash. When my husband came into the nursery to check on me, he looked at the freshly taped box and then at me. "What did you decide?" he asked quietly, leaning against the doorframe. "I'm taking this to the shelter tomorrow morning," I said, my voice steady, though I still felt a lingering knot of anger in my stomach. "And as for Sunday dinner, I'm going to handle it. I'm not going to start a screaming match, but I am absolutely not letting her think I'm her personal free baby boutique anymore." He nodded slowly, a look of profound relief washing over his face. He loved his sister, despite her profound lack of consideration, and I knew a massive confrontation would break his heart just as much as it would stress me out. "Okay, whatever you want to do, I've got your back." The next few days were a blur of nervous anticipation. Every time I walked past the thrift store bag sitting in my closet, the one holding my recovered baby shirt, I felt a fresh wave of indignation. I washed the vintage smocked shirt twice by hand, carefully working the smell of dust and cheap detergent out of the delicate fibres, before packing it safely away in a memory box. Sunday arrived with a heavy, oppressive sense of dread. We pulled up to my in-laws' house, a beautifully manicured suburban home that always smelled faintly of cinnamon and pine cleaner. The driveway was already packed. My sister-in-law's SUV was parked right next to the front walkway. I took a deep breath, plastered a polite, neutral smile on my face, and grabbed my daughter's diaper bag. "Showtime," I muttered to my husband as we walked up the steps. The moment we walked through the door, the chaos of a family dinner hit us. My mother-in-law was bustling around the kitchen, pulling a massive roast out of the oven. My father-in-law was wrestling with the dog in the living room, and sitting on the plush beige sofa, looking perfectly put together and relaxed, was my sister-in-law, bouncing my 6-month-old niece on her knee. "Oh, you guys are here!" she sang out, standing up and shifting the baby to her hip. She walked over, beaming, and pulled me into a one-armed hug. "I feel like I haven't seen you in forever. How is my favourite niece?" She crouched down to coo at my daughter, who was clinging to my leg. I looked down at my sister-in-law. She looked so completely unbothered, so entirely innocent. It made me feel physically ill. "We're doing great," I said, my voice tight but aggressively polite. "Busy, but great." "I know the feeling," she sighed dramatically, standing back up. "Having a 6-month-old is a whole new level of exhaustion. She is growing out of everything right now. It is insane." She shot me a pointed, expectant look. This was it. This was her opening. "I actually sent you a text the other day. I don't know if you saw it," she continued, her tone light and breezy, as if she were asking to borrow a cup of sugar. "I was wondering if you had any of the next size up lying around. I'm totally drowning in tiny newborn clothes I need to get rid of, and I desperately need to size her up." The words, "drowning in tiny newborn clothes I need to get rid of," echoed in my head like a gunshot. "Yeah," I thought furiously, "I know exactly how you get rid of them." I kept my smile firmly in place. I looked her right in the eye, my expression perfectly pleasant, entirely unbothered. "Oh, I did see your text," I said brightly. "I am so sorry I didn't reply. It completely slipped my mind. Actually, I don't have anything right now." Her smile faltered just for a fraction of a second. A flicker of genuine confusion crossed her face. "Oh? I thought you usually kept a bin of outgrown stuff. I do, I chirped, keeping my voice light, as if we were discussing the weather. But I actually just did a massive purge a few days ago. I packed up all of her 6 to 9 month clothes and took them down to the women's shelter downtown. They were doing a big winter drive, and I just figured, there are so many families who desperately need high-quality baby clothes, and I really wanted them to go to a good cause. The silence that followed was incredibly satisfying. It wasn't hostile, but it was thick. My sister-in-law blinked, processing the information. The free pipeline was shut off, and I had done it in a way she absolutely could not argue with without sounding like a terrible person. "Oh," she said finally, her voice notably lacking its previous enthusiasm. "Wow, that's really nice of you, right?" I smiled, leaning in just a tiny bit closer. "I figure, if you're not going to keep the clothes for memories, it's so important to make sure they end up somewhere they'll actually be appreciated and utilized, rather than just dumped somewhere, right?" I held her gaze. I didn't blink. I didn't break the polite, friendly facade. But I let the weight of the word dumped hang in the air between us. I saw the exact moment the realization hit her. It was subtle, just a slight widening of her eyes, a tiny tightening of her jaw. She knew I knew, or at the very least, she suspected I knew something. The sudden shift in my behavior, the very specific choice of words, the sudden donation to a shelter, it was too much of a coincidence. She swallowed hard, her eyes darting away from mine. "Right, yeah, totally. Anyway," I said briskly, turning away to help my daughter out of her jacket. "Let me go say hi to your mum. It smells amazing in here." I walked into the kitchen, my heart doing a victorious little flutter in my chest. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't caused a scene, but I had drawn a massive, impenetrable boundary. The message was delivered, signed and sealed. Dinner was a slightly tense affair, at least on my end. My sister-in-law was quieter than usual, occasionally shooting me thoughtful, cautious glances across the table. She didn't bring up baby clothes again. She didn't mention hand-me-downs. The subject was officially dead and buried. When we finally packed up the car to leave, my husband waited until we were halfway down the street before he spoke. "So," he said, glancing at me in the rearview mirror, "that was interesting. You handled that perfectly." I leaned my head back against the headrest, letting out a long, exhausted sigh. I feel like a massive weight has been lifted off my chest. I don't care if she thinks I'm being petty. I protected my daughter's things, and I protected my own peace. I had learned a harsh, deeply uncomfortable lesson about family, expectations, and the value of communication. I assumed that because we were related, she would automatically share my reverence for sentimental objects. I assumed my unstated boundaries would be respected. I learned the hard way that you cannot assume anything when it comes to the things you hold dear. If you want something back, you have to ask for it. If you want something treated with respect, you have to establish those rules the moment it leaves your hands. And if someone proves they cannot handle the responsibility of your generosity, you cut them off. Completely, unapologetically. I looked down at my phone. The thrift store receipt for $1.99 was still tucked into the back of my phone case. A tiny, crumpled reminder of the day I almost lost a piece of my history, and the day I finally learned how to protect it. I never brought the thrift store incident up to my sister-in-law again. I didn't need to. Our dynamics subtly shifted after that Sunday dinner. We were still polite, still family, but the casual intimacy was gone. She never asked for another hand-me-down, and I never offered one. I started a new tradition. Every time my daughter outgrows a season of clothing, I sort through it. I keep the precious, deeply sentimental items, the milestone outfits, the holiday dresses, the tiny, perfect pieces that spark joy, and I pack them safely away in a designated memory box. The rest, the everyday onesies, the play clothes, the lightly stained sweatpants, I wash, fold, and drive directly to the women's shelter. I no longer give away pieces of my heart, hoping someone else will protect them. I protect them myself. And as for the vintage smocked baby shirt, it is currently sealed in an airtight, archival quality box at the top of my closet, waiting, patiently, for the day my daughter might have a baby of her own. And I can promise you one thing. When that day comes, I will tell her the exact story of how I rescued it from a rusty hanger in a dingy thrift store for $1.99. Have you ever experienced something like this with a family member or friend? Have you ever given away something incredibly sentimental, only to find out it was treated like garbage? Let me know down in the comments what you would have done in my situation. Would you have confronted her directly, or do you think the passive approach was the right move? Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you enjoy these kinds of stories, and I will see you in the next one.